I'm Joel McCower here at the Clean Energy Ministerial with Dan Kammen, Dr. Dan Kammen, my good friend and neighbor, Berkeley professor, a really clean energy pioneer in so many different ways in the academic world, thought leadership world. I don't even know where to go with your resume. But having said all that, you, as you've been listening to what's been going on here in San Francisco, one word that's come up a little bit, a term is carbon tax. It's barely been mentioned, but what do you think about that role of that in this conversation?
Well, I think it's central, and I was really pleased to see Secretary of State George Shultz bring it up as a feature, and I agree with him completely. It's very clear that if we really want to bend the curve to make the transition, we need everyone to speak the same language, not always to agree, but to talk about things in the same way. And you just can't get environmentalists and business leaders and elected officials to do that unless we're valuing or at least pricing out the impacts. So carbon price will get us there.
Right. So it's not going to happen legislatively in the United States anytime soon. How do we get toward that? What's the mechanism?
Well, we have a nice way to start if we choose, and that is that the federal government does about $600 billion worth of business with firms around the world, mostly in the United States, to simply make carbon accounting a business requirement to get those federal contracts, not to charge carbon price, but to say price out option A, we're buying paper from this company or that company, we're buying fertilizer, and do the carbon impact, do the carbon accounting, so that we know what we're choosing. That would start a whole bunch of firms down the road toward understanding what the carbon signature in their products is.
So it's not necessarily about carbon as another attribute like price, quality, availability, or other things like that. It's just making them understand what it is, what the carbon impact is?
Right, so when I was at the World Bank, we wrote something called a business requirement. And if you want to do business with the entity, the federal government, then you need to do this analysis. And we currently do a whole variety of versions. We look at products that are certified safe from pesticides, or they're not made in sweatshops, and so that kind of content labeling is quite common. We could do it with carbon as well. And what I find most interesting is that it would obviously affect big industrial economies, but it would also affect our ability to finance energy access in the poorest communities, because it would allow us to understand the social and economic benefits of bringing energy to the poor. It's not just about adding a tax to the rich.
So I'm still trying to understand. You need to break it down for me a little bit more in terms of if you have this information about the carbon impact of something, what does that do? How does that affect change?
Well, it allows everyone engaged to see what the impacts are. So if the federal government is about to do a major procurement of diesel generators, of paper, a whole variety of products, doing that carbon analysis would allow the government to say, we're going to pick, we hope, the lowest cost bid, but we want the lowest cost bid that also is sustainable.
So all other things being equal, we're going to pick the lower carbon.
Or even things not being equal. You could pick not the cheapest bid, but the one that you think contributes most to sustainability. And we already see that now. There's a number of contracts to build buildings that are not chosen purely on the least cost bid. In fact, the least cost bid often is that we just cut the most corners. And so often if you want to choose a more sustainable product, you might say, I want to have some of these added benefits. In California, reducing our carbon emissions back down to their 1990 levels by 2020 is the law. And going 80% below that by 2050 is also a mission statement. So if we want to buy into our own dream, we need to make that currency real.
So you heard George Shultz mention that. That was inspiring. What else has inspired you here at the Clean Energy Ministerial?
The other big thing for me is that the off-grid energy access story, the 1.2 billion people without even the most basic services, are really on the table in this conversation. It's not just an in-house discussion of a bunch of development do-gooders. There are private companies. There are very different perspectives. Is it humanitarian? Is it pure bottom line? That conversation has permeated the highest levels of the ministerial discussions, and it's also become one of the most interesting opportunities for poor countries to see investment from climate change affecting just the basic economics of poor citizens, including that for women, for disadvantaged minority groups, it's a great equalizer if we choose to take advantage of it.
Is this the fortune at the base of the pyramid we've been hearing so much about?
So I'm not a big fan of that term because that implies there's a lot of money to be made by capitalist companies, and I think companies will make money, but the real story is the investment at the bottom of the pyramid. that these are people who are disempowered, they're not part of the economy. And bringing energy services at reasonable cost is a way to grant not only them an opportunity, but actually to make the citizens of many poor countries more productive. So I'd like to see it as an investment, not a chance to do some carpetbagging.
Right, well, the conversation is moving forward. That's a beautiful thing. So thanks so much, Dan Kammen, UC Berkeley.
Pleasure, thank you.
Thank you.